Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Susan Santor. She is the director of Learning House, and today we're going to chat about dyslexia. We'll do that when we come back, so stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Susan Santor. She is the director of Learning House, and it's her first time on the show. We're going to talk about dyslexia today. First of all, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here.
Now, before we get into dyslexia, and we've got a lot to cover today, I just want to have people learn about the Learning House and what it is. So talk about that briefly.
Well, at Learning House, we work with individuals with dyslexia. So we do teaching, we do an evaluation, and we do a lot of consultation in schools and with parents, and we also do teacher training in the Orton-Gillingham approach.
And as director of Learning House, what does that job entail? It's probably very different on a daily basis, I would imagine, right?
It is very different, and I would say my primary job is to train my teachers to use the Orton-Gillingham approach, which is an approach that was designed for individuals with dyslexia, and also to just manage the scheduling and administrative duties and things like that.
All right, so for people who may not have a full understanding of what dyslexia is, can you give them sort of a layman's definition of what it is?
Yes. Dyslexia is difficulty with words. So when you think of the word dys, D-Y-S, it means difficulty. Lexia means words. And so we're talking about printed words, however, not spoken words.
Okay.
And I think that's a very important concept for people to understand, because it is a language-based phenomena. However, it has to do with print, not spoken language.
So you don't have dyslexia when you speak, but when you read, you have dyslexia.
That's correct.
That's very interesting.
That's correct.
And it certainly, when you say language, it certainly crosses all languages. It doesn't matter what language you speak or read, you can have dyslexia regardless, correct?
Absolutely, and they have found that out, that dyslexia is in all languages.
And so what exactly happens in the brain that causes dyslexia?
Well, let me just preface that question with this information, because it's information that most people don't think about, that we as humans are born with language and the facilities to have spoken language. However, we are not born to learn to read, because the alphabet is how we read. We use the alphabet, and the alphabet is a human invention. So when we think of reading, we have to think about language as it's portrayed in print.
And we don't always speak the way we write or read, I guess, right?
Absolutely. There's a big difference between spoken language and written language.
You know, if you try to write or read the way you speak, it'll actually be incorrect grammar on paper, wouldn't it? The way we speak sometimes.
A lot of times, and there's pauses, and we use hand gestures, and we look at the person, and we take pauses, and there's many other activities that we do when we're speaking with each other. And with writing, it's much more formal.
Right, and also tone can't necessarily be inferred correctly all the time in written form, as opposed to speaking it, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So all that has to be learned.
Right. So as that was a preface for like what goes on in the brain that would cause dyslexia in the first place.
So it's a neurological process. Learning to read is a neurological process. And what we know, and science tells us, that when we learn to read, we develop new neurology. So we develop a word form area, because
new neural pathways,
neural pathways that develop a word form area, because the brain is plastic and it can change. And what distinguishes individuals with dyslexia is that these pathways are not developing as quickly as with typical readers. This is the core of the difficulty with reading. And so we have to kind of force those pathways to work together and to emerge. And it's really quite exciting and amazing that we have the science.
Yeah.
I started in the field when, before we had the science to tell us about the neurology, and yet as a practitioner, I would know that my student was getting it.
Right. Even but without the science and the technology.
Even without the science, you just kind of know, ha, they're making progress and they're getting it. And then the science proves that indeed something different is happening.
You know, it's funny you should mention that because, you know, off the air we were talking in the green room area about, you know, the technology that we use now. You know, you had your iPhone and we were talking about, you know, laptops and things of that sort. But, you know, we're old enough where we can remember not having these gadgets and can actually survive without them. And your instincts could tell you, even without the science, that, you know, you could tell if a student has that problem, that dyslexia, you know, but the science kind of helps it along.
That's correct.
Yeah, really.
You've got it well.
It's as simple as that, really. So fast forward and the times that, how long have you been doing this, by the way, in this field?
38 years.
38 years. So you'd be the perfect person to ask, how has advancement in the field really advanced? How has science and technology advanced from what you knew back then to what you know now as far as the ability to treat it and learn and, like you said, kind of learn a little bit better how to force those neural pathways? Not just that, but other things too.
Well, let me talk about what is needed to teach individuals with dyslexia first, because it doesn't have to do with technology and what's new. It's actually old.
Right. It's anti-technology in a way.
It's anti-technology. Yeah. And so in order to teach individuals with dyslexia, they need to learn the reading process. And the reading process is looking at words and then blending sounds that are associated with the letters of the alphabet together. So we're blending, and the individuals are looking at a word, blending the sounds together in order to read the word. And for spelling, they have to hear the sounds within a word, segment the sounds, and then write the letter that corresponds with the sound. So that's a visual, auditory, and motoric. Writing is motor movement. And that's the process of reading. And individuals who are typical readers can pick that process up with very little instruction, perhaps some instruction, and individuals with dyslexia don't pick that up automatically. So it has to more or less be taught to them very, very explicitly and in a systematic way and at their speed of learning. So this is good instruction for all students to learn. However, dyslexic needs more and more repetition than the typical reader.
So that it, like you said, forces that neural pathway so that it develops.
That's
in the
correct.
brain.
And also a system that's called multisensory, which means they have to look at the word, and that's reading, figuring it out, and then spelling the word and writing the word. So that's multisensory, where you're looking, you're hearing, and then you're writing.
Before they knew what they know now, were students basically just sort of misdiagnosed by teachers without understanding what dyslexia was, that maybe the student just simply was having difficulty grasping the reading, or there was something else wrong with them and they just didn't understand what dyslexia is now, and they were just, like I said, misdiagnosed in a way, right?
Well, dyslexia has been around since the 1800s, so we have known about it for a long time.
Do teachers understand it, though?
I have to say that unfortunately the teacher training institutions don't really teach the science of reading, never mind dyslexia. And dyslexia is not a category in all states to identify somebody as having a disability.
Okay.
So, and from my opinion, that's problematical.
Yeah.
Because then the treatment for dyslexia and the correct instruction is not accomplished.
So now that they do know what they know about dyslexia, what is done in the classroom? Do they give him extra time? Do they get put aside with others that may have similar issues as far as dyslexia goes, and just kind of, you know, read more, learn more, just kind of get them to the point where it's less of an issue? How does it work?
Well, I can tell you how it works with the individual with dyslexia, and then what they have to encounter in classrooms. So what they need is this very explicit multisensory instruction. And yes, it takes a lot of time. An individual who is a typical reader may have to learn a skill in 50 repetitions, where a dyslexic may need 500 repetitions.
That's a big difference too, yeah.
Or more,
yeah.
or
yeah.
more. So the kind of instruction that is imperative for dyslexics and good for all children to learn to read is not the education that is happening within the schools. And so the dyslexics are getting left out.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, a typical thing to happen is once children enter school in kindergarten, that's really the time to begin the instruction of good scientifically based reading instruction. And it's often assumed that it's an easy task to acquire. And I think that's because there's this misunderstanding of what reading is all about, and the thought that, yes, this is an invention.
Yeah.
It's something new. It's like we have engines that are inventions.
Right.
Well, it takes time to learn how to work with an engine
Right.
and how to fix an engine.
You don't automatically, you're not
don't automatically
born.
know it.
It's like you said, you're born with language, but reading is an acquired, you know, a thing.
That's right.
It's a human invention.
It's
really.
a human invention, and some individuals do pick it up quicker than others. And most of the population does.
Yeah. Let's, we've got to take a break because we've got a lot more to get to. Is there a website people can go to and learn more?
There is the International Dyslexia Association, and I think to go to their website. And there's also an Academy of Orton-Gillingham practitioners and educators regarding the instruction for dyslexics.
And they can probably go through the Learning House website.
And they could go through the Learning House website.
All right, we'll put a graphic up on the screen so people can go and learn a little bit more. We'll take a break and come back. Susan Santora is the director of Learning House, and again, we are chatting about dyslexia today. So we'll be back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Susan Santora. She's director of Learning House, and the topic today is dyslexia. And one question I wanted to ask you is, how early can dyslexia in a child be detected? Can a parent discover it and detect it in their child before the child even starts school, kindergarten, or even nursery school? Because parents that are proactive will start teaching their children to read even before they get into school. So they would probably discover something might not be right even then, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, there are some people that say, some of the researchers who say it could be detected at birth.
No kidding.
Because of the neurology, and if we had tests for neurology, and it's also hereditary. So sometimes parents have had the experience of dyslexia and they know the signs in their children. Sometimes as young as 2 or 3 years old, others are saying that sometimes at that age you can detect signs. Either the child is not interested in books or maybe interested in books, but is not really recognizing the print from the pictures necessarily, or not interested in the print. And so we can detect it very early, and yet typically it isn't until children go to formal school, and we could detect them in kindergarten with a very user-friendly, short 5-minute little assessment in kindergarten, and it reliably predicts whether someone will have reading difficulties in 3rd grade.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Now, if you can detect it that early or even earlier, before the child even starts school, if they're not actually reading yet per se, what can you do to kind of get them on track to get those neural pathways kind of developed?
There are pre-reading skills. One is considered phonological awareness. That would be something like doing fun rhyming games, alliteration with young children, and because that's giving them a sense of how words are made up. If you want to rhyme hat and cat, they're picking up auditorily that those words kind of fit together.
Interesting.
And so then it moves to what's considered phonemic awareness, and phonemic awareness is being able to connect the speech sound to a letter. And when you think about speech sounds, we have finite speech sounds.
Yes.
And then we have 26 letters, 44 sounds, and they create over 1 million words. So when you look at it that way, it's really simpler to learn the sound-symbol relationship of the sound with the letter, because it's a smaller number, and then it develops into many, many words.
And you know, there's a lot of children that learn multiple languages, and that only complicates it more when they have to understand syntax and you know, of other languages as well as just the one that we're talking about too.
Right.
Makes it that much more difficult. Is it possible for a blind person to have dyslexia if they're reading Braille? Because it's not, they just don't use the sense of sight, and that's all, but they're still, you know, comprehending the reading through Braille.
That's right. And I'm not expert with the blind, so I don't know whether I can answer that
There's an interesting question.
authoritatively.
Right.
However, I think that you could detect those who would have difficulty because they're not going to pick it up in any form, because eventually it does have to get transformed to some kind of language.
That's a good point. So they're still speaking it, whether they're seeing it or reading it via
right.
Braille. So I want to talk more about the Orton-Gillingham approach, because you talked about, that's your approach, and you talked about that at the beginning of the show. So what is that exactly?
Well, Orton-Gillingham was developed by Samuel T. Orton, who was a neurologist, and Anna Gillingham, who he connected with, who is a school psychologist, and she connected with a school teacher, Bessie Stillman. And so they understood what the components are for good reading instruction, and they came up with the combination of reading, spelling, and handwriting together, and that's the multisensory part of Orton-Gillingham. But what really distinguishes it from other ways of teaching reading is that it is individualized for each student, and it's based on teacher training. And so there was an Orton-Gillingham practitioner who said, if you have a well-trained teacher and a student and stick and sand, you can teach them to read. So it doesn't require, you know, a lot of fancy gizmos.
Right.
However, it's helpful to have certain things for the kids to do that are interesting. But the lessons have to be designed for the individual student. And so
You can't
it's
blanket
not
it
a
through
program.
Yeah.
It's not a
You
program
can't give it
that
to a
you can go
class and do
through.
it.
And
Yeah.
actually, you can give it to a class. You can teach the components of good reading instruction to the whole class, and then you could break the class down into groups according to need. And if more of that was done, I think that we could avoid some individuals developing severe dyslexia, and also many of the behavior and emotional issues that evolve because they feel they're stupid. And actually, many people with dyslexia are extremely smart, and 34% of the entrepreneurs that we have dyslexia.
I think some geniuses in history have had dyslexia, didn't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Albert Einstein.
Einstein, yeah, he had dyslexia. If he can get over it,
goes.
yeah.
So the theory goes.
But again, it starts with the proper identification of it as being dyslexia. And we talked about earlier in the show, there are some teachers that might not necessarily be trained to be able to see that as the problem, you know, and then therein lies the, you know, after that, it's like a domino effect of misdiagnosis,
Right.
so to speak, you know.
Right.
You had mentioned the National Dyslexia website that people can go to and learn more, but you also wanted to mention your local state location.
Well, many states or most regions do have a branch of International Dyslexia Association. So here in Connecticut, we have a Connecticut branch for IDA. And so I think it would be worthwhile for people from Connecticut or Rhode Island and surrounding states to go to the Connecticut branch or to look into their own state branches.
Right, and you can get that, you can either go through the Learning House website, or again, the national, if you go through that, you can probably glean down to
Absolutely.
your state too and learn as much as you can. Definitely go there and learn more. Anything else as we begin to wind down the show, maybe myths or misconceptions that people have about dyslexia?
Well, the myths about dyslexia have to do with everything is reversed, and so that isn't
That's
the
not
case,
true, yeah.
or that it's a visual problem, and it's actually a combination of visual, auditory, and handwriting working together.
Right.
And so those are the myths, and there's a lot of angst that goes with dyslexia, and with good reading instruction, you know, I think we could relieve some of that angst because it leads to emotional issues and behavior issues that might develop earlier than 4th grade, but typically develop around that time when children are expected to read to learn.
If a person, for whatever reason, is kind of identified with it much older, can they still take steps to kind of improve their situation?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it doesn't matter really
Absolutely.
how old you are.
The oldest student that I have had in my career was 76 years old.
Wow, wow.
And he wanted to learn to read.
Listen, people at 74, 76 go back to college.
Right.
They can do anything, so why not,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
kind of relieve themselves of some of that problem. Are you hopeful as time goes on and as, you know, sort of science advances that more and more will be able to be done to help dyslexia kind of do away with itself?
I would be very hopeful.
Yeah.
I would be hopeful that it would happen now if we had the instruction that's needed for all students in our classrooms.
You know, it's one thing, you know, we talk a lot about, a lot of people come on and talk about conditions, sometimes diseases. This isn't something that you can take a pill or a drug for. This is something that can only be, it can be fixed, it can be worked on, and there are ways to do it, and it has nothing to do with, you know, some kind of outside, you know, pop a pill, so to speak, you know.
Right.
It's a condition that can be fixed just with the proper training.
That's correct. You're absolutely correct. And that's why I don't like to consider a disability.
Right.
However, it leads to a disability
Right.
for the individual
What would you
person.
describe it as? A condition, sort of a...
I think it's a condition that requires educational treatment.
Right. All right. Sounds good. Susan Santora, Director of Learning House and our discussion today on dyslexia. Again, we'll put a graphic up on the screen for a website for people from Rhode Island and Connecticut to go to. Pleasure having you on the show. We learned a lot today. Appreciate it.
I appreciate being here. Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us for another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. Go to our YouTube site, by the way, to see this show and many others. We will see you next time. Take care.